when it comes to military industrial complex and the prison industrial complex and just the kind of disproportionate burden, and oppression, I think that our shared communities experience here in these lands that they call Canada, it's pretty wild, um, you know, and I just feel like, when we look at the demographic of workers entering the labor market in the next decade, with all the boomers, the white boomers, retiring, and this like emerging labor crisis they've been talking about in the labor sector for some time. It's migrants, it's immigrants, it's brown, black, and indigenous peoples that are going to represent the vast majority of new workers in the new economy, this one that we're building in response to the global triple threat of the COVID pandemic, the international economic recession at a scale that we've never seen, and of course the existential threat of climate change. And I get a lot of hope when I look at that because, while Indigenous women are the highest, rising population in Canada's prison population right now, in the next decade, there is going to be the biggest transference of economic power to the most marginalized populations in this country, this young country this young settler colonial state they call Canada. And, for a lot of us Native people, that represents the manifestation of prophecies like the seventh generation prophecy, like the eighth fire prophecy of the Anishinaabe people. And I think for me, as far as like, something that happened this year that was positive, I wouldn't say it would be positive, and I'm very conscious about that. But I know for myself as a child of Indian residential school survivors, it was a big deal, for all these little children that never got to go home, these 7,000 plus unmarked graves that got unearthed, with many more probably to come over the months in the next couple of years as they do the investigations at these 100 plus sites, both here in Canada and the United States. It represents a opportunity for these little spirits to finally go home to the good hunting grounds, and for there to be like closure for the families that were impacted by this genocidal policy. It's a big deal when my mom told me about I brought this issue up with her, and I mentioned the unmarked graves found at the Brandon, Manitoba Indian Residential School, and she's like, "Oh, just casually, that's where your dad went." And I was like, "What?" Because neither her or my father told me that that's where he went to residential school. But my dad lost his virginity to a nun at Indian Residential School when he was just a boy at that school. So for me, it represented this immense closure and just this unknown terror, and just kind of like some kind of rational way forward through this messy process of reconciliation. And there's so much more to add to that discourse in regards to turning the horse before the cart again, because we're so sick of apologies as Native people and studies. When we talk about reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, we talk about that. We're talking about reparations. We're talking about land back. The reason that our people continue to suffer these socioeconomic crises is because we control less than 1% of Canada's land mass. We want to have control over our land without being interfered with by provincial governments or by corporations like Coastal GasLink or like Trans Mountain Pipeline or by Justin Trudeau, And as far as like, who do we need to cancel? Well, there's a delegation of our Indigenous leaders that are going to visit the Vatican here in the next month. They're going to go sit down with the Pope and ask for an apology over the role of the Catholic Church in Indian residential schools. And, I think this dude needs to be canceled. Like in the Vatican, it's one of the biggest landholders, on Mother Earth. If the Vatican is serious about reconciliation, then they need to give whatever land holdings they hold here in so-called Canada back to the Indigenous peoples that those land holdings are within their traditional territories exist. And if they're serious about like doing the right, repairing the wrong over their role in Indian residential school, then the Vatican, one of the richest institutions in the world, needs to give these individual students that are still surviving and the families of those that did not survive a substantial cash settlement. So that they're, and not just like $10,000 or $30,000 like Canada did. Like I'm talking like a serious, cash settlement